Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. Bitcoin is in danger of becoming a Rolex. Now, this sounds like a great thing, but what if Bitcoin were only accessible to the wealthy and the rich, like Rolex? I talked with Eli Ben-Sasson of StarkWare this week. A lot of fascinating topics, quantum, OpCat, and technical things such as Collider script. Stay tuned for this conversation. Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Arch Network, the platform building bridgeless apps on Bitcoin. More on Arch later on in the show. Let's kick it off. Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. I've got Eli Ben-Sasson, founder of StarkWare, and we'll be talking about StarkNet, OpCat, quantum, some more interesting topics, existential questions about blockchains, and even Collider script. So Eli, welcome to Bitcoin Season 2. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Charlie, for having me here. Excited to be here.
So you guys are OGs in the broader crypto space, and I would say you're like a household name in Ethereum. But for, I think, primarily this like Bitcoin audience, not a lot of, I think there's some unfamiliarity with StarkWare, StarkNet, like who you guys are, and just general ZK tech and, broadly. So, if you can give me like a little prehistory to this moment here. Where does StarkWare come from? Where does StarkNet fit in? Give me some context.
Okay. So terrific question. A bit of context. First of all, about myself. So I'm co-founder and CEO of StarkWare. I fell in love with blockchain through Bitcoin. It was in 2013 when I attended at the invitation of Gavin Andreessen at the time, and with the backing of Greg Maxwell and Mike Hearn and a bunch of core devs at the time, I joined and spoke about my research. I was a professor of theoretical computer science back then, and I fell in love with Bitcoin. So at that talk in 2013, that was the first time someone mentioned that ZK and cryptographic proofs can solve the scaling problem of blockchain. And that person was me. So that also put me on a trajectory to scaling and also dealing with the privacy of blockchains. I was a founding scientist of Zcash, which is based on academic work that I did. And then in 2018, based on a number of math breakthroughs that led to the ZK Stark family of protocols, co-founded StarkWare. So we've been around as a company since 2018. And what we've done is convinced the world that ZK Starks, which is a particular family of cryptographic proofs that's post-quantum secure, has no trusted setup, fastest to scale, is the end game for scaling Ethereum. But by extension, it's a very good technology for scaling blockchains in general. Now, that's what StarkWare does. StarkWare is a pretty large team. We're over 200 team size. And we developed StarkNet, which is a layer 2 on Ethereum, which is very efficient, very good UX. And we're now bringing it over to Bitcoin. Sorry for the very long answer to your question.
I think that's pretty succinct given the storied history of StarkWare and StarkNet. And, it's interesting because I think that Satoshi themselves even had one or two references to zero knowledge, but the kind of evaluation at the time was well, it's probably not ready. And this is 15, 16 years ago. Here we are. You guys have pretty much led the field on these proof systems. And I'm not super qualified to get into the details of that. But this leads us into the most recent news, which you guys put out this past week or two, which is that, yes, you're a layer 2 on Ethereum, but you are going to now settle on both ETH and Bitcoin. You announced a bunch of partnerships and grants and a whole campaign, but what does it actually mean to settle on both Ethereum and Bitcoin?
What it actually means is that we would like, as quickly as possible and in the safest way possible at any given point in time, to allow Bitcoin users and developers to use StarkNet's technology. So what does it mean? Currently, the only way to use, to scale, to use or connect StarkNet to Bitcoin is through a multisig. But when looking at multisigs, we would like to work with the most, pristine and most trustworthy teams building and operating such things. And we'll have a lot of announcements on that. So that's like the very first thing that is already doable. We're also already partnering with teams that offer things that are fully self-custodial, like atomic swaps. For instance, you could use a StarkNet wallet called Bravos today to scan a QR code and immediately pay on the Lightning Network through an atomic swap built by Atomic Labs. So this is something that you can already do today, and you have a very good UX for doing something that is extremely important in the context of Bitcoin, which is using Lightning and paying on it. And, they're actually, it's a very good and easy to use interface. So that's stage one, connecting in the safest way to Bitcoin today. The next thing we're doing and working is we'll be partnering with very good BitVM teams in order to have StarkNet and connected to Bitcoin through BitVM style bridges, which they have economic security based on one round fraud proofs. It's safer and more self-custodial than using a multisig. And longer term, we would like to, we are waiting for the day that some soft fork will enable full Stark verification. Opcat is one candidate. There could be others that allow this. And when that day comes, very shortly after it, hopefully at the same time even, StarkNet will be fully self-custodial, connected to Bitcoin, allowing more expressibility, better UX, faster finality, things like that.
Yeah, you've got this chart on kind of the announcement of the, StarkNet's going to be on Ethereum and Bitcoin, and it's a great it's like the caterpillar evolving into a butterfly, and you kind of get through. We're going to start with a multi-sig, we're going to go further trust minimize BitVM, and at some point, if Opcat or another type of soft fork happens, then we get to, and I see the words unified layer 2. Is that what you're talking about, where there is minimal or no trust assumptions for like the user to go between Bitcoin and this StarkNet layer 2? What does a unified layer 2 mean, do you think?
Just as you said, Charlie, it is a layer 2 that settles safely in a fully self-custodial way onto both Bitcoin and to Ethereum, meaning that the only assumptions that you have on the side of Bitcoin are that, Bitcoin has the security and finality that it is, famous for having. And that is what it means. And the same thing on the Ethereum side. That's our goal.
I think a lot of Bitcoiners don't appreciate that if you look across the other crypto landscape, you have a lot more autonomy for users to go between blockchains depending on like their technical capabilities. And we don't have that on Bitcoin. I think my friends over at Bitcoin Layers talk about how like everything's a multi-sig. And that's kind of been true for a long time. We can minimize, we can federate those, we can add better trusted vetted counterparties, but it's kind of like there's really just until BitVM or like something like Arc, like very recently, like you kind of just got to trust that the signers are honest, and it's still pretty limited in the extensibility off chain. So, I want to talk, for the average user who's listening to this, they may have never touched StarkNet. Maybe they've just done Bitcoin for forever. What's the TLDR on StarkNet? Like, what does it do? I mean, why would somebody use it? You've had a decent amount of activity on there since launch, but what do people do on StarkNet?
Okay, so what do you do on StarkNet? First of all, you have very good UX alongside. You have basically Web 2 UX with Web 3 security, meaning you have fully self-custodial wallets, but because of a feature called account abstraction, which basically means, if you look at Bitcoin, right, there's only basically one way in order to sign and possess funds, right? And it is a specific cryptographic protocol. Okay. On StarkNet, you can choose whichever way to control your funds, which allows in particular the Bitcoin style, but you can have other things. And this leads, so for instance, if you want, you can choose to rely on biometrics or other things that are very UX friendly and still be fully self-custodial. So that's one thing that you have on StarkNet. You have very good Web 2-like UX. You also have expressibility, which means that developers there can do things if they so choose, like fully on-chain games, or they could have DeFi protocols that are very efficient. You have massive computation that is done on-chain through this technology. So you have more expressibility, a safer programming environment that is next generation smart contract language. You have good UX, and you have very, very low costs for transactions. StarkNet among the Ethereum L2s is the cheapest and has the highest scale. So all of this, translates into something that is very, very good for end users. That's what you have on StarkNet.
So maybe, I don't know if this was defined in like the explanation of like the announcement you're going to settle on both ETH and Bitcoin, assuming that someday we get CAD or some other software. Maybe this is an implementation detail, but help me understand, like, does this mean you'll be posting proofs to both chains, like the identical type of proof, or is there some differentiation between like the Bitcoin side of StarkNet and the ETH side of StarkNet? If I'm asking or framing this question incorrectly, feel free to like clarify and take it and explain it to me how you think
Charlie,
it should be.
you asked it perfectly correctly, and the answer is exactly what you said. You will be using the very same cryptographic proof, mathematical proof called ZK Stark, which I co-invented, and which has the safest assumptions. It is post-quantum secure. There is no trusted setup, no toxic waste like we had in the Zcash protocol or in Tornado Cash and stuff like that. So you have a very, very robust mathematical guarantee of integrity, and it is the same proof type that will go both on Ethereum and on Bitcoin. Now, in terms of what's called the data availability and the way you present that data, it will probably differ significantly between Ethereum and Bitcoin because of the format of the two environments. But our technology will be the same, applied to both ends.
So I want to get into OpCat a bit, and you. I think what's interesting is you guys are huge supporters of OpCat, and anybody who's been paying attention to the research space in OpCat or just kind of Bitcoin research has seen you guys for the past year plus recently really lean into it, allocate a lot of resources, put out a lot of interesting proof of concepts or implementations on like Signet or just research papers. As part of this kind of OpCat campaign, give me you've said it before in other platforms, but let's do it here. Like, why OpCat? Why are you guys such supportive of this? And we can get into some of the details under that.
So the short answer is we are supporters and observers of Bitcoin, and we hear that among the soft forks that could scale Bitcoin, OpCat seems to be the most practical and the one that is receiving the most support from many different parties, most importantly core devs, but others as well. So if Satoshi were to reach out and say, hey, Eli, what would optimize scaling on Bitcoin? What would be your suggestion? It would not be OpCat, I'll be honest with you. It'd probably be a bunch of other things that would go together, having finite field multiplication, a whole bunch of things. Okay, maybe OpCat is one of them, but and I'll say more. If you look at how hard it is to settle Stark proofs given OpCat, it's still pretty damn hard. But that's fine. So it's not like of all the things that I could wish for, if Satoshi reached out and said, please, offer your best, it would not have been OpCat. But the decentralized nature of upgrades in Bitcoin is beautiful, and we want to respect that and work with it. And what we're hearing collectively is that Opcat is the one thing that has the most support. For instance, there's this wiki page, I forgot who created it, asking a whole bunch of core devs, what kind of...
It's the covenants table, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, and it's precisely. A famous table now.
Exactly. So I just this morning tweeted, do you see any pattern emerge? And there are 3 suggestions that are pretty greenish consistently. Not fully green, but the most greenish. And Opcat is the one that is the greenest, just looking at all kinds of metrics. So the others are CTV and CSFS. Okay. And which I support. Yeah, I would say that I support anything that prevents Bitcoin from being ossified and getting ossified and turning into a Rolex, right? Something that only the rich can sort of self-custodially own, and the rest of us are going to need, BlackRock and other large financial institutions in order to access. That to me would be a very depressing end game for Bitcoin. So to prevent ossification, I think almost any sort of upgrade in the form of soft fork is desired. But it seems that Opcat is the one practical thing that has the most consensus, which is why I'm very much in support of it.
Yeah, and that's been my impression too, is that while Opcat may not be the optimal thing, and if we were all technologists being able to design the perfect system for this, but Bitcoin and all these decentralized systems eventually really just become a social game of convincing all the different parties to buy into this idea. This gets into one of, I think, the most interesting, more narrow topics, which is collider script. Basically, this idea that even if we don't get a soft fork for CAT on Bitcoin, there are ways we can emulate it or implement it. They're even clunkier, but I think this brings up a really interesting conversation. Can you explain to me what the collider script is? Maybe to maybe a high school level, if possible, just for the listener. And then we can talk about maybe the implications of that.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say, as a mathematician who now doesn't have as much time to do math, I have tremendous appreciation of just the intellectual beauty of collider script. It's a beautiful piece of math and cryptography by 4 brilliant researchers, Avihu Levi, Viktor Kolobov, both of them researchers at StarkWare, and Andrew Polstra and Ethan Haleman, 2 protocol, OGs. So I think this is a beautiful collaboration between 4 brilliant minds. So it's a very beautiful piece of math. Now, what is the problem? And then a little bit about how it's solved. The problem, and this is related to this thing called covenants, the ability or inability to impose any restrictions on a Bitcoin as you pass it on, right? Famously, it seems that if I transfer a Bitcoin to you, then you, Charlie, can do with it whatever you want. Even if I would like to restrict you in some way, it would be impossible. So that's exactly where they come in, these 4 brilliant mathematicians, and they say, well, actually, if I'm willing to spend enough money, I can today already send you, Charlie, a Bitcoin that you will be forced to comply with certain constraints when you spend. This can already happen today. So covenants, whether you like them or not, they are a thing today. And as the famous joke goes, we already established the fact, and now we are only negotiating the price of covenants. That is the TLDR of their brilliant paper. Now, I can explain a little bit more about how it's done, but basically they show that already today, for a hefty price, you have covenants in Bitcoin.
Let me tell you about one of the most slept on opportunities in crypto. Arch is building fast, composable DeFi apps on Bitcoin. Arch apps tap into the OG blockchain with by far the most liquidity and best brand in crypto. I've known the team for over a year. The tech they're building is solid, and they are racing towards mainnet. There's dexes like Saturn, meme coins on funkybit.fun, instant loans on Cha-Ching, and so much more. Plus, they're rewarding testnet users, so join me in trying out Arch while it's still early. Okay, let's pin this price talk, because I think it does open up a really interesting conversation. Dive into just a second pass on like how it actually works. Collider script, or we're finding SHA-1 collisions. You don't have to explain that, but like again, try to tease this out for me a bit.
So they beautifully explain it a little bit in the abstract in the introduction. They're like, part of the reason there are no covenants today in Bitcoin is that there's like when you process a Bitcoin transaction, there are two separate, it's like, left brain and right brain, and someone has just cut them in the middle. And the left brain can do very elaborate things with very large pieces of information, but they're very limited. They can only compute a hash. And the right side of the Bitcoin brain can do a lot of computations, but only with very, very small numbers. So you have the left part that is like very smart and elaborate, but can only do one thing, but with very large pieces of data. And there's the right part that can do a lot of stuff, but only with very small numbers. What the Kaleidoscript paper shows is that by brilliant cryptography, you can bring together and connect the left side of the Bitcoin brain and the right side. And suddenly you can do a lot of introspection and computations that look at a lot of data. And that's, once you have that, you can actually, enforce or demand that certain constraints be enforced. Now, the exact details of how you connect the left brain and the right brain has to do with something called the birthday paradox and collisions in hash functions. I can explain a little bit about that, but I'm not sure we want to go there.
I think that was a very elegant, simple way of explaining it. But the way we get these hash collisions is we basically have to do a bunch of math with computers to do this, and run those computers, it costs money. And I've seen some attempts at calculating like how much it might cost. But again, this is in theory and an abstract. I don't think we've implemented it. But this does bring up the existential question, which you brought up at the beginning, which we'll come back to now, which is it's simply a matter of negotiating the cost. Are we going to spend all this compute running these computers? I guess here's my first question, which is, if we never get CAT, do you think there will actually be financial incentive to try to run Kaleidoscript compute or other types of emulation? Like, do you think this is eventually going to be in such demand that we actually just brute force these covenants on Bitcoin?
So I think the short answer is yes. And the longer answer is that, and again, as a mathematician, I can tell you that once we're in the business of negotiating a price of something, once we know that covenants are possible today on Bitcoin for a large cost, I think it almost deterministically implies that someone is going to come up with a new way that does it for half the price and then half the price. And these things, I think we'll see that they will go down. So right now, I think maybe it's $10 million to get covenants. I think it won't end there. This is the upper bound on the cost. So I think with time, we'll get lower and lower costs. I think covenants one way or another over the years, even without OpCat, will be arriving on Bitcoin.
And if you consider I haven't done the math on like what StarkNet spends to settle on Ethereum, but like that's well within, I would say, the budget of just assuming activity today and not activity 10 years in the future, like $10 million to get a covenant. There's people who would spend that. There's probably someone who would spend that today. Maybe it's you guys. So this is interesting because a lot of the conversation around CAT is the fear of what it might unlock. And while this is, I think, more narrowly defined to emulating covenants, like, what do you think this does to the conversation around fear of unknown or capabilities? This is a pretty broad topic, but I'm going to throw it at you. Like, what, people who say we don't want this because we don't know what it's going to do and we're not ready for it, but yet it appears that that's kind of a moot point. What's your thought on this topic?
Any soft fork that you do, could it be risky? The answer is always yes. But the question is, what is the alternative? And I'm way more worried about the alternative, because the alternative that we're seeing today, and it's dystopian to me, is the ossification of Bitcoin and the turning of it into something that is a Rolex, right? Something that only the rich can own directly, and the rest can access it through the traditional financial institutions. And Satoshi's, the second section in Satoshi's white paper talks about the need for a cryptographic way for any two parties to transact with no intermediaries. Now, unfortunately, today, this is not the case with Bitcoin, practically. And I'm much more afraid that we will ossify to the point of this never happening, much more than I'm afraid that a soft fork, will have, unintended consequences. Because let me remind you that so much of our lives depends on software today. And there's almost no system of software that doesn't constantly go through upgrades. And do they introduce sometimes bugs and unintended consequences? Yes, surely. But usually you can address those, and it's not so frightening. And we do these upgrades with things that our life depends on, with systems that control airplanes or the air traffic, with things that control medical devices. We trust our lives with software that we constantly upgrade, and we have no problem with that. So I am not too worried about a soft fork in Bitcoin, as much as I love Bitcoin and as much as I agree that there could be concerns about it. I'm way more worried about the ossification that is the result of, I think it's been 2 years since the last soft fork. I think it's much more frightening to me, and it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, we can see it. That we were hosting a conference because, and I'm kind of surprised, like we're hosting a technical conference, which is soft fork forward. We invite progressives and we invite conservatives in the technical community. And I can see this firsthand, the challenge it is to even when Bitcoin is a comparatively small ecosystem, to still even get some of these conversations going. And so I very much see the challenge in the modern Bitcoin era to get even, I would say, narrowly defined changes through. But on the topic of changes, you wrote a great op-ed for us a couple weeks ago on quantum. And this is maybe a little more fun topic because, I don't know, like quantum allows us to imagine the theoretical, and there's, I would say, probably fewer egos involved in the discussion yet, which is nice. We can almost entertain it abstractly right now, without having to argue about implementation or activation. But let's talk a little about quantum. I've had Hunter B. wrote BIP 360 on here a couple times, but there's a bunch of different angles on quantum we can take. I want you to reprise again in a simple kind of high school way the quantum challenge facing Bitcoin and the theoretical risk versus practical risk. You do a great job framing this in your paper. What's quantum?
Breaking cryptography is about finding a needle in a haystack, right? Of all possible strings that could be my password, only one of them is correct. And an attacker needs to find that one, right? If he does so before me, then, he compromised my identity or took my Bitcoin. Okay, so breaking cryptography is always about finding a needle in a haystack. Now, a quantum computer is like a very powerful magnet, which if you have a metal needle in a haystack, you bring this magnet and it just sucks the needle efficiently. So this is the threat of quantum computers. the nice thing is that not all cryptographic systems have metal needles securing them. Some of them have toothpicks securing them, right? In which case a magnet doesn't help at all. So the broad distinction between things that are susceptible to quantum computers and things that are impregnable to quantum computers is the difference between what's called asymmetric cryptography or number theoretic cryptography, which is breakable by quantum computers, and then things that are symmetric cryptography that are resistant to quantum computers. Okay, why am I mentioning this? Things like hashes, like SHA-2, they are of the safe kind. They are post-quantum secure. Things that are based on elliptic curves, Diffie-Hellman, RSA, public key cryptography, these things are like metal. So a quantum computer comes, it will break all of the number theoretic stuff. Now, let's look at Bitcoin. You sign stuff with things that are based on elliptic curve cryptography, so they're like metal needles, but then sometimes you wrap that with a pay to hash, which is turning it into a toothpick. Okay, so first of all, even if tomorrow a quantum computer emerges and you look at Bitcoin transactions, some of them that expose the public keys are toast, but some others are not. So first of all, but we will still have to rescue the the toothpicks. We still have to sort of do something about them, because if you try to use them, someone can immediately sort of break your system. And this is where the ZK Stark system, that I'm very proud to be among its co-inventors, comes in, because it is post-quantum secure. It can sort of completely fix, for those things that are hash-based, it can completely fix the situation and allow you to move your keys safely to something that will be, in an everlasting way, be post-quantum secure.
Yeah, you talk about the ZKP's family of cryptographic solutions, in particular ZK Starks. I thought that was very interesting. I would recommend people go just read your op-ed. You have a section in there which I think does help frame the discussion pretty well, which is you make this analogy to like quantum and nuclear fission. And because there's a lot of people who are like, this quantum discussions, it's a total red herring. We should never do this. It's just this useless professor thing. And I'm like, well, I mean, is it? You make a very good analogy here for how to think about this from a risk, and as we're in this theoretic phase, to perhaps someday in an actual quantum implementations. What is this analogy you make, and how does it help the listener think about quantum?
So in that analogy, we're at the phase where, the rudiments of, let's say, nuclear physics have been invented, but we're still several years or even a decade or so before a nuclear bomb arrives. And the nice thing is that gives us sufficient time to actually move to a system where the nuclear bomb just cannot explode and doesn't cause any harm. Basically, by moving from systems that are based on number theoretic assumptions that would be blown away by a quantum computer, you can move to systems, for instance, that are based on ZK Starks, that are completely impregnable to quantum computers. We have enough time to do that. So it would be a very complex process, because, we're all used, all the wallets, the hardware wallets, everything is sort of made for the existing systems, which are breakable by quantum computers. But if we put our minds to it, we could actually move to a system where you cannot break, even a quantum computer cannot break, any transaction on this new form of Bitcoin.
A couple, I would say, challenging questions on this topic for you. And I'm not familiar with other algorithms which might be quantum secure or on some gradient here. But I know there's multiple different algorithms out here, that say we could do this and make Bitcoin quantum secure. why ZK Starks over some of these other ideas? How do maybe, and feel free to be a little technical on this if you wish.
Okay, so first of all, for the new signature scheme to which you move, yes, there's a large number of suggestions and different protocols that not all of them are based on post-quantum safe ZK proof technology. There are things based on lattices, there are things based on hash functions, and they're all viable approaches. The nice thing of or the one advantage that you have with a ZK-based system is that it allows you, even after quantum computers are around, for those transactions, for those Bitcoins that are secured currently by a hash, but that under that hash, something like a pay to public key hash, right? And maybe Satoshi even has some of these transactions. So let's take a concrete case. So I don't know if Satoshi has transactions that are secured by pay to public key hash, but suppose he or she does. Okay, and now a quantum computer has come and you have a whole bunch of transactions that haven't been ported over to the new format. So now Satoshi comes around and wants to move to the new system. Well, if Satoshi were to do a standard transaction, he would have to expose a public key that is breakable by Shor's algorithm. So that rules it out. The only reasonable way to save the situation goes through a post-quantum secure ZK proof, where Satoshi would prove that he knows a pre-image that corresponds to a valid public key. And that is exactly where something like ZK Starks shine in. So yeah, just summarizing, for the new format for signing things in Bitcoin, there's a large number of suggestions, some of them based on ZK Starks, but many others not. But for allowing someone like Satoshi to move things that are hidden under hashes in the existence of a quantum computer, I think ZK Stark is pretty much your only option.
Hi, this is Charlie, and we at Blockspace are putting on Op Next, a technical scaling conference for Bitcoin. It's coming up here very soon, April 11th and 12th at the Strategy, formerly MicroStrategy HQ in Tysons, Virginia.
Join us on April 11th and 12th for talks and presentations from the likes of Jameson Lopp, Jeremy Rubin, James O'Byrne, John Attack, and many more on the most pressing questions for Bitcoin's future and technical development. Tickets go up in price on April 1st. We're going fast. Get them while they're cheap. And we hope to see y'all there in April.
Go to opnext.dev. That's opnext.dev to get tickets and learn more. You gave me a great segue into my next question, which is, so we know that Satoshi has mined a bunch of Bitcoin back in the day, significant amount, estimates of a million or so Bitcoin, and we identify this by a pattern, which we relate to Satoshi. But we look at like that era, and you have a lot of those coins which are vulnerable to quantum computer. And this has sparked some discussion on like, what should the Bitcoin network do if somewhere down the road, these coins have not been migrated to a post-quantum secure signing scheme. And, like, it's been pretty interesting. This has been a kind of a new conversation the past few weeks where I've seen, longtime well-known core dev, Peter Willa, Jameson Lopp, another big name in Bitcoin. Both of them have argued for, basically you might call it confiscation, or you might call it burning of those legacy coins, those vulnerable coins. And this has sparked some interesting discussion because folks like Hunter and my own personal initial reaction was, to not do anything. I don't know if you've thought much about this topic or if you have any opinions, but I'm curious, do you have a take on this, and what's your reasoning?
So now I realize I have to write a blog about it, but here's
Sounds like you do.
I haven't spent a lot of time, but I spent a little bit of time, and here's what I would suggest. I really hope, and this is where I need to do a little bit of research. I really hope that within this pattern, there's some place where something Satoshi has done or stated, there's a hash that no one but Satoshi knows the preimage of which. Okay, and everyone agrees that that is a Satoshi thing, and hopefully there are several of them. So what I would suggest, right, if someone asks me, you dictate what should be done, I would say something like this: for a pretty long time into the future, and now we move to a to a post-quantum state. So within this huge transition, which will necessarily be a hard fork because all of the signature scheme will change. So anyways, it must be a hard fork. Within that, the new protocol says, in order to spend any of Satoshi's coins, you need a ZK Stark proof of knowledge of a preimage of one of those hashes, right? And or maybe a few of them. So there will be some social discussion. We agree what would make us identify Satoshi, and we would say if Satoshi proves to us that he controls, he knows the preimages of those things, then he gets all the coins. But I would probably put a limit in time on it, and after some time deprecate it, and then extend the mining, halving thing, so that we actually go back to 21 million coins at infinity, right? That's what I would do, because I would just say, well, practically speaking, and it could be a pretty long time horizon, I don't know, 30 years, 50 years. I would say that if within 50 years Satoshi has not come back, and then the only thing that could happen is he's somehow cryogenically frozen, or maybe he's been taken by extraterrestrials and will be brought back. So I would say in that case, by the time he or she comes back, well, they'll find some way to convince us, and I'm sure the world will reward them. Already more than a decade ago, I said that Satoshi should receive both the Nobel Prize, at least for economics, maybe also for peace, but also the Turing Award. So he'll be commemorated in other ways if that happens.
They'll come. Yeah, that'll be quite a day. There'll be every single award ever by the time they come back 50 years from now. So I think maybe to wrap this up, really enjoyed this conversation so far. To wrap this up, one of my favorite analogies, I actually subtweeted this that you mentioned, I think, a week or two ago, and I not heard this, and you mentioned here, is this fear of Bitcoin becoming a Rolex analogy. And you did already talk about this, but I want to revisit it because this very succinctly sums up my own personal views, which is many of us who've been in Bitcoin a long time, I don't like to think I've gotten complacent, but I do look at the Bitcoin of potentially the near future, and it does not look like the same Bitcoin that I got into, or the reasons I got into Bitcoin, which is I feel that Bitcoin should be accessible to people without intermediaries. And you say, and I agree with this, that we're headed to a future where it does not look like that's going to be the case. I want you to revisit this topic, and maybe let's end with just you telling the listener, why is Bitcoin headed to be a Rolex, if you will, and what are the ways we can avoid or prevent that future?
Right now, Bitcoin is not accessible to most of the world in its true form, which is by sending and receiving transactions through the Bitcoin protocol. It is too costly, it is too cumbersome. And now, even if you're a Bitcoin max and you think it's the best invention ever, you have to face reality. Most of humanity does not use Bitcoin, period. It just doesn't. Now, you could say, well, they just don't know yet. And I think, but that's the reality. And we've been at it, for more than 15 years. And the same applies to a lesser extent, but still applies to the Lightning Network, right? Which was supposed to be the way to scale Bitcoin. The reality is that, first of all, it also goes through centralization, and it is not used enough. It is not convenient enough to use. And I'm reminding that in order for it to be used, you have two issues with it. You need interactivity. You need to have someone you trust be online all the time, or else your tokens might be stolen. And you have capital inefficiency, because in a payment channel, both sides need to put up collateral that is higher than the amount they transact on. So those are probably the reasons that's the way it is. So the reality today is that those of us who want to use Bitcoin simply cannot for our daily groceries. Now, so where is Bitcoin heading? Certainly it's making headlines. Heads of states are talking about it. You're going to have companies creating reserves for it. And it could very easily turn into something that is held in a self-custodial true way on Bitcoin only by the rich, which is what I meant by a Rolex. Whereas the rest of humanity, if you want to access it, you must do it through, ETFs, through financial institutions, through things that then it just is another asset class to you. So the whole purpose of Bitcoin, in my eyes, which was empowerment of individuals, allowing everyone to participate in a way that is with no intermediary. It's just Satoshi's word, right? Words. The first sentence of the second paragraph in the white paper, we need a way, I forgot the exact quote, a cryptographic way to allow any two parties to interact with no trusted intermediary. Right now, Bitcoin is failing this. And I think if Bitcoin if we don't fix this, if the world doesn't fix this, then, well, personally, I am not interested in creating yet another asset class for the rich, in addition to the Picassos and Bansky, pictures and all kinds, and the Rolexes and the diamonds and gold and other assets. I'm not interested in this. I don't care for it. I mean, and I think many people that are in it for freedom and for empowerment of individuals are not interested in just having created another Rolex. And I think in order to prevent Bitcoin from turning into a Rolex, you must allow true development of the infrastructure, and you must have a lot of developers being able to contribute to it and build it. And right now, it's getting harder and harder, and people are losing faith, right? It's been 2 or 3 years since a soft fork has happened. Can you imagine any other infrastructure, software that is a living system that doesn't have any upgrades to it and updates? I think it's not even about OpCat. It just is, well, I mean, I'm an optimist, so I think this will be fixed. And I think the sort of arc of history of freedom, of empowerment of individuals is stronger, and it will prevail. But for that, we need soft forks. We need this thing to evolve and not ossify.
That's very well said, Eli. I appreciate your emphatic words. You've been around in Bitcoin a long time. I think a lot of us who've been in Bitcoin a long time can sometimes lose that initial energy and kind of that romantic initial discovery of Bitcoin that many of us first had. So I appreciate your words and thoughts on this. Just to wrap this all up, if someone's listening to this, never heard of StarkWare, never heard of you guys, where do they go to follow along with your stuff, your company, and your work?
Well, they can follow me on Twitter. They can follow StarkWare and StarkNet on Twitter. I will share a few links. There's a lot of resources about the math. I once in a while do a Stark at Home webinar, and there's a bunch of them already out there explaining the math and the vision and stuff like that. So I hope we can share some links there, but very easy to find us. Google, ChatGPT, your favorite, Perplexity, whatever. They all know about us.
Great. Thank you so much, Eli, and I wish you the best. And one of these days, I'll see you in person, whether it be I don't know which continent it'll be on, but it'll happen. So I wish you the best.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much.
Peace.